My name is Kenna Cole. At 33 years old, I'm a paratrooper, a single mother, and I am standing on the edge of desperation. My 13-year-old daughter, Maya, needs emergency spinal surgery to keep her from becoming permanently disabled, and I'm $10,000 short. I had to swallow my pride to call my wealthy parents, asking only for them to co-sign a loan. My father, a CEO, flatly refused. He wasn't willing to take the risk. Just a few minutes later, my sister posted a photo online. My parents were smiling, raising champagne glasses at the lavish engagement party they were throwing for her in Aspen, a party that cost $25,000. They chose to celebrate the man who once assaulted me instead of saving their own granddaughter. If you have ever been treated like a failed investment by your own family, if you have ever been betrayed by the ones who were supposed to protect you, you will understand why I couldn't let this go. Let me know where you're listening from. Like and subscribe, because this is the story of how the soldiers I served with became my true family. The call ended, but I didn't move. I kept the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone. A long, flat, infinite sound that felt like a final mockery. It buzzed in the hollow space my father's voice had just occupied. I didn't cry. The tears, they wouldn't come. It was as if they had frozen solid somewhere in my chest, a block of ice pressing against my lungs. I just sat there, motionless on a hard plastic chair in the hallway of Womack Army Medical Center. The wall in front of me was a dull, sterile beige, the kind of color designed to be forgotten. All the sounds of the hospital, the distant beep of a machine, the squeak of a nurse's shoes on the linoleum, the low murmur of conversations I couldn't understand, faded into a dull roar. The only thing I could hear, the only thing that was real, was the echo of my father's words, looping endlessly in my mind. Not willing to take the risk. It wasn't a rejection. A rejection is something you can argue with, something you can recover from. No, this was different. This was a verdict. A judgment handed down from on high, declaring that my daughter and I were not worth the slightest inconvenience. We were a bad investment, a liability. Our value had been calculated, and we had been found wanting. My training as a soldier, as a staff sergeant in the 82nd Airborne, had taught me to compartmentalize, to assess a threat and act. But this wasn't a firefight. This was a slow, quiet bleed-out in a beige hallway, and the wound had been inflicted by my own blood. But then, a flicker of something primal and desperate sparked inside me. The last act of a daughter. My thumb, moving on its own, scrolled through my contacts. It stopped on a name I'd known my entire life. Mom. I pressed the button. In that moment, a small, foolish part of me still believed. It believed that a mother's love was a force of nature, a final line of defense that could not be broken. My father was the cold strategist, the CEO who saw life in terms of profit and loss. But my mother, Eleanor, she was supposed to be the heart. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice was a hushed whisper, as if she were afraid of being overheard. Kenna. I couldn't form a request. The words wouldn't come. I didn't ask for money. I didn't plead. I just asked the one question that mattered, the question a child asks when the world no longer makes sense. Mom. Why? The silence on the other end of the line was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It stretched for an eternity, thick with everything she wasn't saying. I could hear her faint, shallow breathing. I could picture her standing in a luxurious, wood-paneled room in that Aspen ski lodge, clutching her phone, her eyes darting around to make sure my father wasn't listening. Then her voice came back, trembling but resolute. Final. Preston knows what's best for the family, dear. Don't make this any harder than it has to be. And then she was gone. That was the kill shot. Not my father's cold cruelty, but my mother's weak, terrified obedience. Her choice to stand with him, to protect the fragile, glittering illusion of their family over the flesh and blood reality of her own granddaughter. That was the knife that cut deeper than any other. That was the true betrayal. As if on cue, my phone screen lit up. A notification. A new post from my sister, Serafina. My thumb tapped it before my brain could protest. And there it was. Aspen. It wasn't just a party, it was a declaration. A message sent across 1,000 miles. My parents, Preston and Eleanor, stood in the center, beaming. They were flanked by my sister and her fiancé, Damien. My father's hand was on Damien's shoulder, a gesture of proud ownership. My mother's arm was wrapped around Sarah's waist. They formed a perfect, impenetrable circle of protection. Their smiles weren't just happy, they were defiant, a clear statement to the world and to me. This is our family. These are the people we protect. I zoomed in on my mother's face. I was looking for a sign, any sign of regret, of coercion. There was none. Her smile was radiant, genuine. She wasn't a hostage, she was happy to be there. My grandmother, a woman of deep faith, used to read me a verse from the Psalms when I was a child. It came back to me then, not as a comfort, but as a bitter confirmation of fact. When my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take me up. I never understood the desolation in those words until that moment. I took a deep breath. The cold, antiseptic air of the hospital filled my lungs, and for the first time, it felt clean. It felt pure. I opened my phone's contact list. My finger, trembling slightly, hovered over the name Mom. I pressed down on the delete button until the confirmation popped up, and then I pressed again until the name that had defined my existence vanished forever. Then I scrolled to Dad. Delete. I didn't do it in a fit of rage. I didn't scream or curse. I did it with the calm, chilling precision of a soldier amputating a gangrenous limb to save the rest of the body. I was executing a mission. My mission was Maya, and on this mission, there was no room for traitors. Deleting those names from my phone wasn't an impulse. It was a final, necessary field, dressing on a wound that had been festering for a long time. The initial injury, the one that broke the bone and tore the muscle, had happened a year earlier. It happened on Thanksgiving. I remember the feeling of unease as I walked through the oversized double doors of my parents' home in Myers Park, Charlotte. The house always felt more like a corporate headquarters than a place where a family lived. The air was thick with the rich, comforting smells of my mother's truffle-stuffed turkey and spiced pumpkin pie. But the warmth stopped at my nostrils. The atmosphere itself was cold, meticulously arranged, and utterly sterile. I was in my dress blues, the uniform a stark contrast to the soft cashmere and tailored suits of the other guests. My mother had insisted I wear it. People should see what our daughter does, she'd said. But I knew the truth. I wasn't their daughter. I was an exhibit. A strange, martial curiosity they could display to prove their family had a certain kind of diversity. I was a conversation piece. The true center of their universe that day was my sister, Sarah, and her then-fiancé, Damien Vance. He stood by the marble fireplace, a Rolex glinting on his wrist, a glass of expensive single-malt whiskey in his hand, holding court. He pontificated about stock trades and market volatility with a smug grin that never reached his eyes. My father, Preston, stood beside him, beaming, clapping him on the shoulder with a look of genuine pride I hadn't seen directed at me since I was a child. I felt like an alien who had landed in the middle of a perfectly staged play. My mother drifted past, her smile as tight as the pearls around her neck. "Smile, dear," she whispered, her voice a gentle command. "We have guests." The polite fiction held for about an hour. Then the whiskey started to do its work on Damien. He turned his attention to me, his gaze sweeping over my uniform with open disdain. "So, Staff Sergeant," he began, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Kill any bad guys today? Or were you just busy polishing weapons on my tax dollars?" A sudden, sharp silence fell over the dining room. Sarah let out a nervous little giggle. My father cleared his throat, a non-committal sound that meant, "I will not intervene." Years of training kicked in. You don't react. You don't show emotion. You control the engagement. I kept my voice level, calm, almost conversational. "At least the money I earn comes from sweat and honor, not from manipulating the market, Damien." It was like striking a match in a room full of gas fumes. His face went from a smug pink to a blotchy, furious red. The mask of civility shattered. He shot up from his chair, knocking it backward onto the Persian rug. "What the hell would a grunt like you know about anything?" he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. Before I could even brace myself, he lunged across the small space that separated us. It wasn't a sloppy, drunken swing. It was fast and brutally efficient. His fist connected with my side, right on the floating ribs. A hot, blinding flash of pain exploded in my torso, stealing my breath and buckling my knees. I crumpled to the floor, the world narrowing to a pinprick of agony. But the punch wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what happened next. My father, Preston, moved instantly. But he didn't move toward me. He rushed to Damien, grabbing his arms, restraining him. "Calm down, son," he said, his voice firm but placating. "It's not worth it." My mother, Eleanor, scurried to my side. But she didn't kneel down to help me. She didn't ask if I was okay. She grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet, half dragging me out of the room. Her only concern was hiding the evidence, removing the ugly disruption from her perfect party. The next thing I knew, I was in the cavernous kitchen, leaning against a stainless steel counter. My mother pressed a bag of frozen peas against my throbbing side, her hands trembling. And that's where they held my trial. My father stood in the doorway, arms crossed, refusing to look me in the eye. His voice was cold, devoid of any concern, filled only with the clipped annoyance of a CEO handling a PR crisis. "Damien is a part of this family now," he stated, as if reading from a legal document. "You shouldn't have provoked him. You know he has a temper." Sarah appeared behind him, her face a mask of theatrical tears. "You ruined Thanksgiving," she wailed, her voice rising. "You always do this. You always have to make everything about you." I looked from my father's stony face to my sister's performative grief, to my mother, who was staring intently at the floor as if memorizing the pattern of the tiles. In the Army, we have a sacred principle: the chain of command. It's a structure of accountability. If there's a problem, you report it up the chain, and you trust that those in charge will address it with integrity. But in my family, the chain of command was hopelessly broken. The very people who were supposed to be in charge, the ones who were supposed to protect their own, were the source of the injustice. They were the enemy command. Then my father delivered the final verdict. The sentence. "There will be no police," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "We will handle this in-house, and you will not speak of this to anyone." He finally met my gaze, his eyes like chips of ice. "Don't let that aggressive military attitude of yours ruin your sister's future and this family's reputation." My father's words, that aggressive military attitude, he meant them as an insult, a dismissal. He couldn't understand that this attitude was the only thing holding me together. It was the bedrock, the foundation of the fortress of solitude I had built around myself and my daughter. It was the only reason I could function. My days in Fayetteville, North Carolina, were a study in gray monotony, a silent testament to that discipline. They started at 0430 hours, long before the sun even considered rising over the pine forests. The only sound was the shrill digital beep of my alarm clock. There was no one there to nudge me awake, no gentle kiss on the forehead, just the beep and the cold floorboards under my feet. I'd slip out of bed, careful not to wake Maya, my movements practiced and silent. By 0500, I was on the field for PT, physical training. I'd run my 5 miles in the damp, chilly air, my breath pluming in front of me. My muscles ached with a familiar, deep burn, but my mind was heavier. I'd look at the other soldiers running beside me, their faces set with determination. We were all tired, all pushing through the pain. But they were part of a larger machine, their fatigue in service of a shared mission. My burden, the one that truly weighed me down, was invisible. It was a private war, fought in the quiet moments between formations and drills. After the run, I'd race back to our small 2-bedroom rental apartment just off post. I'd shower, get dressed, and then begin the morning ballet of a single parent. Pack Maya's lunch. Make sure her homework was in her backpack. A quick breakfast of cereal and milk, eaten in a near-mechanical silence. All of it had to be done on a timeline as rigid as any mission brief. After dropping Maya at the middle school bus stop, my next battle began. It was a fight waged not on a battlefield, but in a drab, fluorescent-lit office. I went to the Army Emergency Relief Headquarters on post, a place I'd only ever heard about. The AER is there to help soldiers in crisis. It's a safety net, or so I thought. I sat across from a civilian employee, a tired-looking woman with glasses perched on her nose. She listened to my story with a practiced, detached sympathy. I explained Maya's condition, the urgency of the surgery, the $10,000 shortfall. She nodded, typed on her computer, and then explained the rules. "Staff Sergeant, we understand your situation, and we're very sorry for what your daughter is going through," she said, her tone flat. "But the maximum zero-interest loan we can approve immediately is $2,000. For $10,000, our policy requires a co-signer with a credit score over 700, a co-signer." The words hung in the air between us. I felt a thick, invisible wall materialize right in front of my face. The very system I had sworn an oath to serve, the institution I had dedicated my life to, was binding my hands with bureaucratic red tape. I was a soldier. I was a leader. I was trusted with government property worth millions and the lives of my subordinates. But here, in this office, I was just a number, a risk. I felt a profound sense of powerlessness that I hadn't felt even in the worst parts of Afghanistan. On the drive back, I stopped at the Food Lion. The grocery store was another battlefield, one of numbers and quiet sacrifices. I pushed the cart down the aisles, the squeaky wheel a constant annoyance. My mind was a running calculator. I'd pick up the box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch that Maya loved, hesitate, and then put it back on the shelf, grabbing the cheaper store-brand version instead. I'd walk past the beef, opting for the less expensive chicken thighs. Every item was a choice, a small surrender. Standing in the checkout line, I saw another family ahead of me. The husband was in his uniform, a young specialist. His wife was with him, and their two little kids were happily chattering in the cart, which was piled high with groceries. Name-brand snacks, soda, a little birthday cake in a plastic box. They looked happy, carefree. A wave of bitter self-pity washed over me, so sharp it almost made me gasp. I was a soldier too. I served too. I sacrificed too. So why did I have to fight this war all by myself? The crushing weight of being a single mother in the military had never felt so real, so painfully sharp. If you've ever felt that kind of loneliness, that feeling of fighting a battle no one else can see, it's a heavy weight to carry alone. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button to show your support for Kenna. And in the comments, I'd love for you to share one simple comfort food that always makes you feel just a little bit better. That evening, the fortress felt more like a prison. I made spaghetti with jarred tomato sauce and frozen meatballs. Maya tried her best to be cheerful, to hide her own fear behind a brave smile, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Mom, is everything going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small. I pulled her into a hug, burying my face in her hair, trying to pour all the strength I didn't feel into my words. "Of course, sweetie," I said, my own voice sounding hollow to my ears. "I'm a paratrooper. I can handle anything." It was a lie. Or maybe a prayer. Later, after Maya was asleep, I sat alone in the dark living room. I stared out the window into the Fayetteville night. In the distance, I could hear the deep, guttural roar of a C-130 taking off from Pope Field. It was a familiar sound, a reminder of the powerful world I belonged to. A world of strength, of honor, of unwavering commitment. The soldier's creed echoed in my head. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. Right now, my fallen comrade was sleeping in the next room, and the world of strength and discipline that I served felt a million miles away, utterly incapable of giving me the one thing I truly needed: help. The fortress of solitude I had built was beginning to crumble. The discipline, the rigid schedules, the relentless forward motion. They were a soldier's tools, designed to function under pressure. But I wasn't just a soldier anymore. I was a mother, backed into a corner, and the walls were closing in. The weight was too much. The silence was too loud. I was breaking. The next day at work, I tried to maintain my composure, filing paperwork as if my world wasn't imploding. But my hands were shaking. My focus was gone. My best friend, Sergeant Eva Rostova, watched me from across the office. Eva was a force of nature, a tall, formidable Polish immigrant with a heart as big as her frame and an accent as thick as the rye bread from her homeland. She didn't pry or poke, she just waited. Finally, when we were alone in the supply room, surrounded by the smell of canvas and cleaning solution, she put a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Kenna," she said, her voice a low rumble. "Talk." That was all it took. The dam broke. I leaned against a metal shelf and everything came pouring out. The phone calls, the surgery, the AER office, the photo from Aspen, the crushing weight of it all. I finally allowed myself to be vulnerable, to admit that I couldn't handle it. As Brené Brown says, vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the greatest measure of courage. At that moment, I didn't feel courageous. I just felt broken. When I was done, my voice raw and cracking, Eva didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. She just pulled me into a fierce, bone-crushing hug. She held me as I finally cried. Not the silent, frozen tears of before, but hot, messy, racking sobs. I cried for my daughter, for my broken family, and for the little girl inside me who had always just wanted her mother. When the tears subsided, Eva held me at arm's length, her eyes blazing. "Why you not say sooner?" she demanded, her voice thick with a protective anger. "We are family. Family does not leave one alone." That simple word, family, was like a warm current flowing into my frozen soul. It was everything I had been searching for, and it was here all along. Eva Rostova did not waste time. She was a woman of action. The moment we left the supply room, she was on a mission. She marched straight to our company commander, Captain Miller. He was a young officer, barely 30, but he had the wisdom of a man twice his age. He listened to Eva's blunt, rapid-fire summary of the situation, his expression growing more serious with every word. He didn't quote regulations. He didn't mention bureaucracy. He looked directly at me and asked two simple questions. "Staff Sergeant Cole, how much do you need, and when do you need it?" His response was so direct, so free of the institutional nonsense I'd just faced, that it almost brought me to tears again. When he heard the full story, he didn't hesitate. He picked up his phone and made a call to the hospital director, Colonel Marcus Thorne, letting him know the situation. Meanwhile, Eva was already tapping away on her phone, creating a group chat with the NCOs in our unit, laying out the problem in a few short, powerful sentences. The spirit of the 82nd Airborne, the unspoken creed of "no one left behind," was activated. The massive, often impersonal machine of the U.S. Army, which had seemed so indifferent just hours before, suddenly pivoted. It became nimble, personal, and profoundly human. Within hours, it felt like the entire community of Fort Bragg was mobilizing. Eva, with the captain's blessing, organized an emergency unit BBQ and bake sale, right on the grassy field in front of our company headquarters. Word spread like wildfire. The officers' wives arrived with sheet pans of still warm homemade brownies and chocolate chip cookies. The unit's first sergeant, a man known for his intimidating scowl, manned the grill himself, flipping burgers with fierce concentration. I stood to the side, watching in a state of stunned disbelief. Young privates, kids making a few $100s a month, came up to the donation jar and stuffed in $5 bills, $10 bills, whatever they could spare. A retired command sergeant major I didn't even know, who had heard the story through the grapevine, drove on to post and found Eva. He handed her a plain white envelope. Inside was $500 in cash. The unit did the same for me back in '98, was all he said before tipping his hat and driving away. These people who shared no blood with me were giving pieces of their own lives, their time, their money, their hearts, to save my daughter. They weren't doing it for recognition. They were doing it because I was one of them. I was family. By the end of the day, the collection jar was overflowing. We counted it up. It was nearly $9,000. So close, but still just short. My heart sank for a moment, but then a new resolve hardened within me. I knew what I had to do. I went home and walked to the small wooden footlocker at the end of my bed. I opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet lining, was my collection of challenge coins. In the military, these coins are everything. They aren't just metal, they're memories. Each one is a story, a mission, a piece of your career, of your soul. There was the coin from the 82nd Airborne Division, the one from my first tour in Iraq, another from a joint training exercise in Germany. They were my history, my proof that I had been somewhere and done something that mattered. Without a second thought, I scooped them all into a bag. I drove to a military pawn shop just outside the gate, a place soldiers go when they're in a tight spot. I walked in, emptied the bag onto the counter, and sold my past. As I walked out of that shop with the last bit of cash I needed, I didn't feel a sense of loss. I didn't feel sad. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had traded my history for my daughter's future. It was the easiest deal I had ever made. I walked out of the Womack Army Medical Center finance office with a piece of paper in my hand. It was just a receipt, a simple confirmation of payment in full, but it felt as heavy and as significant as a medal. For the first time in weeks, I could take a full, deep breath. The knot of cold dread that had been sitting in my stomach finally began to dissolve. Maya's surgery was officially scheduled for Monday morning. We had made it. I stood in the parking lot under the warm North Carolina sun, a genuine feeling of hope returning to me like blood to a numb limb. I immediately called Eva. "We did it," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I just paid it. Eva, everyone, you saved her." I could hear her broad smile through the phone. "Is what family does," she said simply. We hung up, and I just stood there for a moment, basking in the relief. It was a fragile piece, but it was real. In that moment, I felt safe. I felt cared for. I felt like everything was finally going to be okay. And that's when my phone rang again. It was an unknown number with a Colorado area code. I answered absently, assuming it was a misdial or a spam call. But the high-pitched, bubbly voice on the other end was instantly, sickeningly familiar. It was my sister, Serafini. "Kenna? Oh my God, it's me. Guess where I am?" She didn't wait for an answer. The words came tumbling out in a breathless rush, a torrent of privileged excitement that felt like it was being beamed in from another planet. She was at the Little Nell, a 5-star resort in Aspen. She talked about the pristine white snow, the bottomless glasses of Veuve Clicquot champagne, the private ski lessons. She went on and on about how wonderful and attentive and perfect Damien was, how he'd bought her a diamond bracelet that was just to die for. I stood there, frozen, the warm sunlight suddenly feeling cold on my skin. I listened to her describe a world of effortless luxury, a universe away from my reality of bake sales and pawned memories. I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream. But a dark, morbid curiosity kept me on the line. I wanted to see just how deep the chasm between our two worlds really was. I wanted to know how far her cluelessness could possibly go. Then she found a new depth. "Oh, by the way," she said, her tone shifting to one of casual afterthought, as if she were about to comment on the weather. "Mom told me about Maya's thing. Such a shame, really. Anyway, I had an idea." I braced myself. "Damien and I are planning our honeymoon in Hawaii after the wedding. We were thinking, maybe you could come out to our place and house sit for us. I could even pay you a little, to help you out with your money troubles. Wouldn't that be nice?" The world went silent. The sounds of the parking lot, the rumble of cars, the distant chatter, all faded away. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. I was completely and utterly speechless. She wasn't just bragging about her perfect life while mine was hanging by a thread. She was offering me charity. The most insulting, degrading, tone-deaf charity imaginable. She saw my life or death struggle for my daughter's health as an opportunity to offer me a job as the hired help. In her mind, I wasn't her sister. I wasn't a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army. I was the poor relation, a pathetic creature to be pitied, someone who could be bought off with a demeaning handout. The receipt in my hand suddenly felt like a worthless piece of trash. The love and sacrifice of my unit, the dignity I had fought so hard to maintain, she had erased all of it with one thoughtless, benevolent offer. As the writer Audre Lorde once said, "My anger has meant pain to me, but it has also meant survival." In that moment, I understood exactly what she meant. The pain was excruciating. But the anger was a pure, cold source of energy. It was the only thing that kept me standing. I took a slow, steadying breath. When I finally spoke, my voice was dangerously calm. It was a voice I'd used on the training field, a voice that carried no emotion, only command. "Sarah," I said, the single syllable as sharp as a shard of ice. "My daughter is having major spinal surgery on Monday. Do you honestly think I have time to come and watch your house?" Her response was the final gallon of gasoline on a raging fire. It was a statement so profoundly selfish, so breathtakingly stupid, so perfectly representative of the coddled princess she had always been, that it would be burned into my memory forever. She let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh my God, Kenna, you're always so dramatic. It's not the end of the world. Besides, Dad and Mom didn't help you, right? You should be lucky I'm even thinking of you and offering to help out." I didn't say another word. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just ended the call. The quiet rage that had been simmering inside me for years, the anger from 1,000 tiny cuts and one brutal punch, was no longer simmering. It had just been ignited. It was a wildfire now, and it was ready to burn everything to the ground. After I hung up on my sister, I didn't throw my phone. I didn't scream. I didn't punch the wall. The wildfire of rage inside me didn't manifest in noise or violence. It condensed. It cooled. It became something dense and heavy, a terrifying calm that settled deep in my bones. I got in my old Ford sedan and just started driving. I had no destination. I drove through the familiar streets of Fayetteville, past the endless strip malls and pawn shops that line the roads around any major military base. I was on autopilot, my hands steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road, but my mind was a world away. It was processing, analyzing, recalibrating. Eventually, I found myself pulling off the road onto a dirt patch overlooking Simmons Army Airfield. I killed the engine and the headlights, plunging the car into darkness. The only light came from the powerful floodlights illuminating the tarmac and the blinking lights of the aircraft. I sat there, listening to the familiar roar of C-130 engines as they taxied, took off, and landed in a ceaseless, powerful rhythm. Through the chain-link fence, I could see them, the silhouettes of paratroopers, my brothers and sisters in arms conducting night jump training. They were moving with purpose, with discipline. I have spent my entire adult life learning to control my emotions. In the Army, you learn to compartmentalize. You take fear, anger, and pain, and you pack them into a small, tight box in the back of your mind. You learn to function in spite of them. You learn to turn that raw energy into fuel for the mission. And tonight, I was going to use every bit of that training for a mission of my own. A bitter truth crystallized in my mind as I watched the planes ascend into the black sky. For years, I had tried to keep my two worlds separate. There was Staff Sergeant Cole, the paratrooper, the NCO. And then there was Kenna Cole, the daughter, the sister. I endured the dysfunction and casual cruelty of my family because I told myself it wasn't a real fight. It was just family. I was wrong, so profoundly, fundamentally wrong. My family, with their corrosive hypocrisy and their casual disregard for anyone but themselves, was not a separate world. They were an enemy force, and an enemy must be confronted. Preston, Eleanor, Sarah, and especially Damien, they hadn't just hurt me. They were a threat. They represented everything I had sworn an oath to fight against when I first put on this uniform. The rot of corruption, the abuse of power, the belief that money and status put you above decency and the law. My silence hadn't kept the peace. It had enabled them. It had been a form of cowardice. That's when the mission parameters became clear. My weapon would not be a rifle. My weapon would be the truth. My battlefield would not be some dusty village in a foreign country. My battlefield would be the very system my father, Preston Cole, had built his empire on and worshipped like a god. I knew better than most that his company, Parkside Medical, was a major defense contractor. And with those lucrative government contracts came a mountain of rules. They were held to an incredibly high standard of ethical conduct and security protocols. Their leadership, the CEO, his family, his close associates like Damien, had to be clean. They had to be beyond reproach. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that they were not clean. Covering up a violent assault, coercing a non-commissioned officer to remain silent to protect the family's reputation, that wasn't just unethical. In the world of defense contracts, that was a security risk. It was a character flaw that could compromise a company trusted with the health and safety of American soldiers. My father had built his castle on a foundation of lies, and I was about to light a match. General George S. Patton once said, "Accept the challenges so that you can feel the exhilaration of victory." The crisis with Maya had been a challenge I had to accept to save her life. This was a challenge I would choose, so I could finally feel the exhilaration of victory over the people who had tried to reduce me to nothing. I watched one last C-130 lumber down the runway, its engines screaming as it lifted into the darkness. I saw the green lights inside, the signal for the jumpers to stand and hook up. They were about to leap into the void, trusting their training, their equipment, and the person next to them. They were brave. It was time for me to be brave too. Under the faint glow of the airfield lights, I made a silent vow. I will not be silent anymore. I will not protect them from the consequences of their own actions. I will not allow them to harm anyone else. I will use the very system they revere to hold them accountable. That was the moment the switch flipped. The anger was no longer a fire, it was forged into the cold, hard steel of a mission objective. If you've ever reached that point, that moment of absolute clarity where you decided enough is enough, hit the like button and stand with me. I want to know what your battle song is. Let me know I'm not alone in this fight by commenting below with the name of the one song that makes you feel unstoppable. For example, Survivor by Destiny's Child. I started the car. I drove back to my apartment not with rage, but with purpose. I walked inside, the silence of the small apartment a comfort now, not a burden. I went to my desk and pulled out my government-issued laptop. It was a rugged, ugly piece of equipment built for function, not form. Just like me. I opened it. The screen flickered to life, bathing my face in a pale blue glow. My fingers found the keyboard. The real war had just begun. The war room was my 10 by 10 foot living room, and my theater of operations was the glowing screen of my government-issued laptop. There were no maps on the wall, no fellow soldiers to strategize with. There was only the low hum of the computer and the cold, clear purpose that now filled the space where anger and grief had been. My first action was to establish a secure perimeter. I created a new encrypted file, buried it deep within the laptop's directory, and gave it a name: Operation Cole. This wasn't about family anymore. This was a mission, and I would approach it with the same precision and detachment I would any other. I began assembling my intelligence, my ammunition. I created a document, a timeline. I started with Thanksgiving of last year, November 24th. I documented the time of the incident, the exact venomous words Damien had spat at me, and my response. I detailed the assault, the sudden, brutal impact to my ribs. Most importantly, I chronicled the aftermath, the words of my own family that cut deeper than any physical blow. My father's chilling declaration, "Damien is part of this family. You shouldn't have provoked him." His final command, "There will be no police. We will handle this in-house." Each word was a piece of evidence, a nail in the coffin of their integrity. I scrolled through my phone, my thumb moving with a steady, robotic calm. I found the Instagram post from Sarah, the one from the night my world fell apart. I took a high-resolution screenshot. My parents, flanking Sarah and Damien in Aspen, their champagne glasses raised in a toast. The date stamp, the location tag, the gleeful caption. It was all there. A perfect, damning portrait of their priorities. Next, I dug into my email archive. I searched for Parkside Medical and Contract. It didn't take long to find them. Years' worth of emails from my father, forwarded to my government address with a kind of smug pride. Announcements of new contracts with the Department of Defense, press releases boasting about their partnerships. And then I found the one that made my blood run cold. It was an internal newsletter from last spring, proudly announcing Parkside Medical's renewed contract to supply critical medical equipment to several military hospitals. The first one on the list was Womack Army Medical Center. My hospital. The place where my daughter's future hung in the balance. They weren't just my family. They were a link in the supply chain that was supposed to support me, to support my comrades. And they were rotten to the core. Each piece of evidence wasn't just a personal grievance, it was a data point in a larger picture of profound ethical failure. But I knew I couldn't act on emotion alone. I needed to confirm my strategy. The next morning, I requested a brief meeting with a captain in the JAG Corps I'd worked with before, a sharp, by-the-book officer I trusted. I didn't give him my story, I gave him a scenario. Captain, I began, keeping my voice level and professional. Hypothetically, let's say a soldier becomes aware that a key member of a defense contractor's leadership was involved in a violent assault, and that the company's CEO actively covered it up, including pressuring a service member to stay silent. Does that soldier have a responsibility to report it? He didn't even blink. He looked at me, his expression firm. Sergeant, it's not a responsibility. It's a duty. The integrity of the defense supply chain is a matter of national security. A leader who would cover up an assault is a leader whose judgment is compromised. That's a risk we cannot afford. That was my green light. That afternoon, I began to write. I did not write as Kenna Cole, the broken-hearted daughter. I wrote as Staff Sergeant Kenna Cole, U.S. Army NCO in charge, fulfilling her duty. The report was clinical, stripped of all emotion. It was structured with the cold logic of an after-action report. Subject: Report of ethical and security concerns regarding defense contractor Parkside Medical. Contractor name: Parkside Medical Inc. Seats, Charlotte, North Carolina. Leadership personnel. Implicated: Preston Cole, CEO. Damian Vance, fiancé of board member's daughter and close business associate. Incident summary. On November 24th of last year, Mr. Vance physically assaulted the undersigned service member. The incident was witnessed by Mr. Cole, who subsequently used his position of familial authority to suppress the reporting of the incident to law enforcement, citing concerns for family and company reputation. Potential risk assessment. The leadership's demonstrated willingness to conceal a violent crime and coerce a service member indicates a significant character and ethics failure. This lack of integrity presents a potential security risk, compromising the trustworthiness of a contractor responsible for providing critical supplies to U.S. military personnel. I read it over, then I read it again. It was all there. The facts laid out like bones on a table. I navigated to the Department of Defense hotline website, the official anonymous portal for reporting waste, fraud, and abuse. I uploaded my meticulously crafted report. My finger hovered over the submit button. For a fleeting second, I paused. My eyes fell on the small framed photo on my desk. It was of Maya, taken last summer, a wide, gap-toothed grin on her face. This wasn't about revenge. I knew that now. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. This was cold and clean. This was about protection. It was about protecting her future from the poison of that family. It was about protecting every soldier who relied on a system that was only as strong as the integrity of the people within it. The warrior ethos, the creed I lived by, echoed in my head. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I had not quit on my daughter, and I would not quit on this. I took a deep breath, the sterile air of my apartment filling my lungs, and I clicked the button. There was no sound, no explosion, just a small quiet line of text that appeared on the screen. Your report has been received. But I knew with every fiber of my being that I had just armed a time bomb and placed it at the very foundation of my father's world. The time bomb I had planted didn't go off with a bang. It started with a whisper. 2 weeks after Maya's surgery, life had found a new, quiet rhythm. She was recovering beautifully, the resilience of a 13-year-old on full display, already graduating from the walker to crutches with a determined look on her face. Her complaints about the physical therapy exercises were getting louder, and her negotiations for more screen time were becoming more sophisticated. These were the sounds of healing, the sounds of normalcy. For the first time in months, I felt the tight, relentless knot of dread in my stomach begin to loosen its grip. The world, for a brief moment, felt stable. I was on my lunch break at the battalion headquarters, methodically working my way through a sad desk salad, scrolling through my phone when I saw it. It was a small article on the website of the Charlotte Business Journal, a publication my father used to leave on our marble kitchen island as if it were scripture. The headline was innocuous enough, buried halfway down the page. Local defense contractor Parkside Medical faces federal review. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake as I held the plastic fork. I just took a slow sip of the bitter, burnt coffee from the office machine and read. The article was vague, professionally cautious, citing anonymous sources about an internal ethics investigation into the conduct of senior leadership. There were no names, no specifics, no mention of assaults or family drama. It was just a ripple on the surface of a very large pond, a small tremor before the earthquake. I didn't feel a surge of victory. I didn't feel glee or the hot rush of revenge. I felt inevitability. It was a cold, clean feeling, like watching a distant demolition you know is scheduled to happen. In the military, we have a principle called economy of force. You don't need to launch a massive frontal assault to win a war. Sometimes all it takes is applying precise, overwhelming pressure to a single, critical weak point. The gears of a great and impartial machine, a machine far bigger than my family's influence, were beginning to turn, set in motion by a single, anonymous report. I closed the browser, tossed my empty salad container in the trash, and went back to work. The machine was running. All I had to do now was wait. A week later, the whisper became a roar. This time, it wasn't a small local paper that required scrolling to find. It was the front page of the business section of the Wall Street Journal, displayed on the TV in the break room. The headline was stark, brutal, and impossible to misinterpret. Parkside Medical's $50 million DoD contract suspended indefinitely amid ethics probe. The article wasn't just a report, it was a demolition. It detailed, in cold, factual language, how the Department of Defense had placed an immediate and indefinite hold on all existing and future contracts with Parkside, pending the outcome of a wide-ranging investigation. It spoke of a sudden, catastrophic collapse in investor confidence. Then, it named names. Damian Vance, described as a close associate of the Cole family with significant financial ties to the company, was also facing scrutiny from his partners, his own investment firm, Suddenly Toxic. The reporters had dug deeper than I ever could. The investigation, which they confirmed started with a single tip to the DoD hotline, had apparently unearthed more than just the cover-up of an assault. It had uncovered a pattern of what the paper delicately called ethical lapses and questionable business practices, hinting at nepotism and conflicts of interest. My father had built his empire on a foundation of pristine reputation and ironclad connections. I hadn't just exposed a single crack in that foundation. I had revealed that the entire thing was rotten from the ground up. I watched it all from the quiet sanctuary of my small apartment in Fayetteville, 160 miles and a different universe away from the epicenter in Charlotte. I watched as the company my father had built his entire identity around began to publicly crumble. The storm wasn't loud and violent. It was a quiet, systematic dismantling. It was the cold, inescapable logic of consequence. Then the phone rang. The shrill sound cutting through the silence. The caller ID simply said, Preston Cole. I stared at the name, my father's name, and felt nothing but a profound stillness. I let it ring twice, a small act of reclaiming power. Then I took a deep, steadying breath and answered. The voice that came through the speaker was not the one I knew. It wasn't the calm, condescending baritone of the CEO who had dismissed my life's work. It was the raw, ragged snarl of a cornered animal, laced with a panic I had never heard before. "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "What in God's name did you do?" I remained silent, holding the phone slightly away from my ear, letting him empty the chamber. "You've ruined us. Everything. Decades of work, our name, our standing in this city. You've destroyed this family. You destroyed me." "For what? Because you couldn't get a little loan? Are you that pathetic? That spiteful?" He was ranting now, a torrent of accusations and insults, a desperate attempt to find purchase on a cliff face that was crumbling beneath his feet. I listened patiently, the way you listen to an incoming artillery barrage from a safe bunker. You don't argue with it, you just wait for the explosions to stop. When he finally paused, gasping for breath, I spoke. My voice was quiet, level, and utterly calm. "I didn't do anything." "Don't you lie to me," he roared, his voice ragged. "They said it was an anonymous tip from a service member. It had to be you." "I didn't do anything to you, Dad," I repeated, my tone unchanging, clinical. "I just told the truth. The consequences you're facing right now are the result of your choices, and Damien's choices." I let a beat of silence hang in the air, a silence more powerful than any shout before I delivered the final, precise strike. "You were the one who always taught me to be accountable for my actions. Remember?" There was a sudden, choked silence on the other end of the line. It was as if I'd reached through the phone and slapped him. He had been ready for my tears, for my anger, for a fight he could understand. He was not ready for his own logic being turned back on him like a weapon. He was not ready for the calm, disciplined soldier he had always despised. He stammered a series of broken, incoherent sounds, trying to find another accusation, another threat, but the words wouldn't come. He had no ammunition left. I hadn't attacked him. I had simply held up a mirror, and the reflection had destroyed him. Finally, all he could manage was a guttural, defeated roar of pure frustration. And then, the line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone and placed it on the counter. There was no shaking, no adrenaline, just a profound, quiet stillness. The silent storm had passed, and I, for the first time in my entire life, was the one left standing. After the storm comes the quiet. But it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the heavy, humming silence of aftershock, a landscape forever changed. The world of the Cole family, as I had known it, had been leveled. Now I had to walk through the ruins and decide what, if anything, was worth salvaging from the ashes. I found myself thinking of the Serenity Prayer, a simple plea my grandmother used to recite. "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." I could not change my family, but I could, for the first time, change the terms of my engagement with them. The first attempt at contact came a week after my father's phone call. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope forwarded to me at the base from a prestigious Charlotte law firm. The letter inside was cold and formal, requesting a private meeting with my mother, Eleanor. They were communicating through lawyers now. The family was officially a legal dispute. I agreed, but on my terms. Not in their mansion, not even in their city. A neutral space. A small, independent coffee shop in Fayetteville with worn-out armchairs and the constant hiss of an espresso machine. My territory. She arrived looking like a ghost of her former self. The perfect blonde coif was slightly disheveled, and the designer clothes hung loosely on a frame that seemed to have shrunk. She looked 10 years older. She sat across from me, wringing her hands, avoiding my eyes. She didn't apologize for her silence, for her complicity. She didn't ask about Maya. She got straight to the point, her voice a fragile whisper. "Kenna, your father, the company, it's all he has. You have to retract your statement. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." She finally looked at me, her eyes pleading. "It's our family's legacy, Kenna." I looked at this woman, my mother, and felt a profound, aching sadness. She was still trying to save the house after it had already burned to the ground. "My legacy is Maya," I said, my voice quiet but firm. My legacy is a daughter who knows her mother will protect her, no matter the cost. I've chosen my legacy, Mom. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the words settle between us. So have you. The next attempt came from my father. A FedEx overnight package arrived at the base, addressed to me. Inside was a cashier's check. The number written on it made me blink. $100,000. Tucked inside with it was a small note, scrawled in my father's impatient handwriting. Just 4 words. For Maya, now stop. I stared at the check. It was a staggering amount of money. It was security. It was a new car, a down payment on a house, a college fund for Maya set for life. But it wasn't a gift. It wasn't an apology. It was a transaction. It was the final, arrogant attempt to buy my silence, to pay off his guilt like it was just another invoice. He still didn't get it. He never would. He believed everything and everyone had a price. Without a moment of hesitation, I took the check and tore it neatly into 4 precise squares. I put the pieces back into the FedEx envelope, sealed it, and wrote the return address for Parkside Medical's corporate headquarters on the front. I sent it back without a note. My silence, I decided, was a far more powerful message than any words I could write. The final call came from Sarah. Their fairy tale wedding had, of course, been called off. Under the crushing weight of the scandal and the collapse of his finances, Damien had done what cowards do. He had run, leaving my sister in the wreckage. She was hysterical when I answered, her voice a torrent of sobs and accusations. "You did this!" she shrieked. "You ruined my life. I hate you. It's all your fault." This time, I didn't get angry. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. I just listened, holding the phone to my ear as she poured out all her pain and rage. I let her finish. Let the storm of her sorrow finally exhaust itself into ragged breaths. When she was done, I spoke, my voice calm. And for the first time, carrying not anger, but a strange, sad pity for her. "No, Sarah," I said, my tone gentle but firm. "I saved your life from an abuser. Maybe someday you'll understand that." Then, before she could reply, I ended the call. And I blocked her number. The last door was closed. In the midst of these familial aftershocks, something unexpected happened. Captain Miller called me into his office. He looked at me with a respect I'd never seen from my own father. "Sergeant Cole," he began, his tone formal, "your leadership has not gone unnoticed. The way you've handled this entire personal crisis, with professionalism and integrity, while never once letting it affect your duties, it's been exemplary." He paused. "The battalion command has unanimously recommended you for officer candidate school." I was stunned into silence. OCS. It was the path to becoming a commissioned officer. It was a future I'd dreamed of but never thought possible as a single mother. It was a level of respect and recognition I had stopped seeking from my family years ago. I had spent my whole life trying to earn a place in a family that saw me as a liability. And here, in this family of soldiers, this family I had chosen, they saw me as a leader. As I walked out of his office and into the bright North Carolina sun, I felt the last of the heavy weight lift off my shoulders. That evening, I went home and started packing boxes. Maya and I were heading for a new chapter. And for the first time, the future felt like my own. 6 months later, I stood on the parade grounds of Fort Moore, Georgia. The humid summer air was thick with the smell of cut grass and starched uniforms. I wasn't Staff Sergeant Cole anymore. The uniform I wore was new, the fabric crisp, and on the shoulders were the single, gleaming gold bars of a second lieutenant. The officer candidate school graduation ceremony was a blur of precision drills, shouted commands, and speeches about leadership and honor. But my focus was fixed on one point in the sea of faces in the bleachers. Maya sat in the front row, wedged between a beaming Eva Rostova, who had driven 8 hours straight from North Carolina to be there, and Captain Miller, who had come on his own time. When the commanding officer called out, "Second Lieutenant Kenna Cole," a cheer erupted from that small section, louder and more passionate than any other. It was Maya, jumping up and down, waving a tiny American flag. Our eyes met across the field, and in that one look, A universe of pride, love, and shared survival passed between us. I wasn't just a soldier struggling to get by anymore. I was an officer, a leader. I hadn't just taken back control of my life, I had elevated it. I had learned to fly. A few weeks later, we were back at Fort Bragg. But the world felt different. It was the 82nd Airborne's annual Family Day. The giant polo field was covered in bouncy castles, picnic blankets, and the organized chaos of 1,000 military families. The air was filled with the sounds of children laughing, the sizzle of hot dogs on massive grills, and the thumping beat of a military band playing pop songs. Maya, completely healed and faster than ever, darted through the crowds, a streak of pure joy. We weren't alone in the crowd. We were the center of a small, rotating universe of friends. Captain Miller, now a colleague I could almost call by his first name, came over to shake my hand and congratulate me. Colonel Thorne, the hospital director, made a point to find us and ask Maya if she was planning on joining the Army's soccer team. Soldiers from my old unit swarmed us, ruffling Maya's hair, telling bad jokes, and asking about OCS. I stood there, a plate of food in my hand, watching Maya laugh with Eva. And I was struck by the profound contrast. This was family. It wasn't the quiet, tense performance of a Thanksgiving dinner in a sterile Charlotte mansion. It was loud, a little messy, and wonderfully, unapologetically alive. It was a community bound not by blood, but by shared sacrifice, mutual respect, and an unspoken promise to catch each other when they fall. Later that afternoon, Maya came running up to me, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She was dragging Captain Miller by the hand. "Mom, look, I made this for him." She shyly handed him a folded piece of construction paper. He opened it carefully. It wasn't a drawing of a house or a flower. It was a child's masterpiece of a bright blue sky, filled with dozens of little green parachutes floating gently downwards. In the very center was one giant, bright red parachute, and dangling beneath it, held safely, were two little stick figures, one with long brown hair, one with short. Me and her. And above the drawing, in the careful, slightly wobbly letters of a teenager trying her best, Maya had written a single sentence. "Family is what keeps you safe when you fall." Captain Miller stared at the drawing for a long moment. I saw his eyes glisten, and he had to clear his throat before he could speak. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is the best thing I've ever been given, Maya. Thank you." He looked at me over her head, and his eyes held a universe of understanding. The story ends, as it should, not with a storm, but with a quiet sunrise. The next morning, Maya and I were out on one of the running trails that wound through the pine forests of Fort Bragg. She was keeping pace with me, her breath steady, her legs strong. The early morning sun was filtering through the trees, casting long shadows on the path ahead. We didn't talk much. We just ran, sharing the comfortable silence of two people who understood each other completely. I looked over at my daughter, at the determined set of her jaw and the easy smile on her face as she ran, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. I finally understood. The writer Maya Angelou once said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." I had been changed. The scars from my past were still there, faint lines on my soul, but they no longer defined me. They weren't a source of shame or pain. They were a map. They were a reminder of the battles I'd fought and the strength I never knew I possessed. I had won. I had won the only fights that ever truly mattered. I had saved my daughter. I had found my real family. I had reclaimed my honor. The past was a closed book, and the future. The future was an open sky, vast and blue, and waiting for me. And so my story finds its sunrise. I wanted to share this journey with you because I know I'm not the only one who has had to build their own family from the ashes of the old one. Thank you for walking this path with me. If my story has resonated with you, your support means everything. Please like this story and subscribe for more tales of resilience and finding strength. And in the comments below, I would be honored if you shared the name of just one person who is part of your chosen family.